Hi, hello everybody, and welcome. I'm Kate Pala, Director of Programs and Artist Services at Jamaica Center for Arts and Learning. I'm very excited to welcome all of you to Puerto Rico Update with Prolibertad. The third JCAL presents live streaming Building Equity for the Immigrant, Indigenous, and Native American Artists and Cultural Leaders event. This live streaming series is one of many activities under the umbrella of JCAL's two-year pilot program, Building Equity, funded by New York Community Trust. We want to thank them so much for making this possible. Remember to join us next Monday, same place, same time, 7 p.m., for our fourth in the series, Film and Music Sounds of Siberia. It's hosted by Vera Solovyeva, and you can find out more about all of the Building Equity program and all of our guests on our website, jcal.org. Also, please take a moment after this to fill out our Building Equity survey. Your input is important for our future programming. So tonight, I am, and JCAL is very honored to have a longtime Queens resident, Rafael Landrón, a cultural worker, poet, educator. He currently teaches at Boricua College as a history professor. He has published various works, including a children's book, Beba y la Isla Nena, which he has adapted to a play performed by children in Ecuador and New York City. He has also performed his poetry throughout New York City, including his one-man show, Rafi's Anti-War Expressions, that showed at La Tea in the Lower East Side. He believes in the power of art to educate and impact our reality for the better. And of course, that was a super short version of Rafael's many achievements. But with no further ado, hi, Rafael. I'm so
Hi, Kate.
happy you're with us.
Thank you,
Thank
Kate.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Uh, I'm going to let this happen, and it's in the wonderful hands of Rafael Landrón
All
and
right,
his guest.
everyone. Thank you,
Bye.
Kate.
Thank
Right
you.
now, I'd like to begin by welcoming everyone. First, I'd like to thank the Building Equities Project of the Jamaica Center for the Arts and Learning for sponsoring the program tonight. And I'd like to personally give a shout out to Roberto Borrero for giving me the opportunity to put this together. The purpose of tonight's program is to explore the current conditions of Puerto Rico, both on the island and in the greater diaspora, and to celebrate the resiliency of the Puerto Rican people through culture and poetry. I'll be playing both role of host and cultural presenter. Tonight, we hope to give you a good blend of poetry and politics of the Puerto Rican diaspora. Our first presenter tonight is my friend Nancy Mercado. She is the 2017 recipient of the American Book Award for Lifetime Achievement. She was named one of 200 living individuals who best embody the work and spirit of Frederick Douglass by the Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives and the Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center at American University. She is the editor of the first New Yorican Women's anthology, published in Voices e-magazine, Hunter College, CUNY. For more information, go to nancy-mercado.com. And without further ado, Nancy Mercado.
Hi, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thank you for having me. This first piece that I'm reading is titled, I Come to See for Myself on the Anniversary of Hurricane Maria. And I think it's still relevant because we still haven't recovered from this disaster. And we have like, I don't know how many umpteen amount of disasters on top of this one. So I fly in to see for myself, below blue tarps over the homes of my nation, like those silver blankets that cover the souls of Mayan and Arawak children locked inside cages on the U.S. mainland I left behind. Arriving home, I enter a mass of confusion. Plantain crops walloped in their places of birth, 5 foot tall grass rebelliously advancing to heaven. My mother's lemon tree on her last leg, hunched over, barely breathing. I witness it for myself. Splintered wooden electrical poles held up by a neighbor's twine. Trees arrowed through one another, now growing sideways, surviving. Not the palm trees, though. The palm trees chose victory or death, no in between half hearted living, some growing new hair, others simply guillotined by Maria's detonation. I walk into the new growth of forest, detect the low lamenting sounds of the injured there, witness the anger etched into the undulating mountains surrounding me in the distance. I see the U.S. cavalry arrived just in time. Cortez and Columbus repackaged into a 21st century nightmare. Armies in metallic flying machines using talking devices, exchanging messages in a foreign language through invisible airwaves. I see the cavalry arrive to help themselves to the casinos they built, to hurl paper towels at the local mortician, to seize their opportunity to maximize on the extinction of the natives, keeping them in drawn out darkness with no power to run hospitals, no shelter, with no water. I crossed the land from west to east, south to north, to see the revelers and the ruin for myself, to lend an ear to survivors and to the dead, see shuttered schools for miles along the route. I run out of fingers on which to count them all. Part of the plan to ruin us, a small voice reminds me. I walk along the turquoise shore lined of amputated homes, crumbled fences, collapsed doorways into the sea. Inside, bits and pieces of families remain, their vestiges now across the Atlantic at the opposite end. Back in Ponce, I sit in my mother's rocking chair, watch my neighbor's hummingbirds who've arrived to visit her ruby coral bells. I think of my father's strength in his humility. He walked in silence, built a house to withstand a cyclonic catastrophe. I've seen for myself the natives are the majesty of this world. Together, they've cleared the paths, sawing, hewing through mammoth barriers of deceit and loathing, retrieved their own water, traversing the inundation of Washington's elite that vowed to drown them. They went about their lives by the light of a candle or an old wooden light pole they stitched back together with all the love on earth, maneuvering through a world of cadavers inside Maria's eye, amid the tantrums of the privileged. A nation held its ground, now raises its foundation of ancestral eminence anew. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rafael.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Nancy. That was beautiful. The poem that I'm going to read is entitled They Come. They are tear gassing migrants who fled from their own terror of poverty to come to the land of the American nightmare where his children are being taken away from him. They come from beauty and hunger, from 500 years of resistance they come. They come from brujos, from mountains, from fields and factories. They come from hunger. They come with aspirations and dreams. They come with hopes of a new future, one without violence they come. They come to work. They come to cook. They come to take care of our children. They come and have been coming to survive and thrive and live. They come to love. They come to work and will not be stopped. You cannot tear gas a dream. You cannot detain hunger. You cannot detain the love of a mother to her child. They come and will keep coming for as long as you do not return their earnings for 500 years. Until you return the land, until you return the language, until you return what is owed to them, they will keep coming. You who took and keep taking, now call them thieves. You who have lived well off the wealth of the poor will be dealt with. Yet you send your armies to try and stop their arrival, but they're coming and will arrive on your doorsteps, in your suburbs, in your lives of protected immorality, and you will pay for your greed. To struggle is to love, is to dream, is to feel, is to survive, is to thrive, is to thrive. is to thrive. I'm going to welcome the next poet. He's a good friend of mine, Angel Martinez. He's a professor, poet, singer, and musician. He has published poetry articles and book reviews in the subjects of Puerto Rican studies. And I'll give it to my friend Angel now.
Yes, thank you, Rafael. And this is in dedication to one who helped make the Puerto Rican community in New York City possible. This is called Jesus Colón. Camarada Jesus, I am writing this note as I stare at my library. You were long gone when I saw your sketches, remembering the original Puerto Ricans in New York. Your hand told us never to forget our heritage, our people, our nation, all built by our hands. Yes, I said it, comrade. Borican will be free sooner than we think. We did not forget to sing or dance or recall. We did not forget we were rolling cigars, working the docks, sailing the merchant fleet. We did not forget Simon Bolivar in a dusty bin. We know he fought our fight of all the hemisphere. We know we fought long before that day at Guanica. Yes, I said it. We must know your story. We must remember you.
Thank you, Angel. I'd like to now, we're going to present Benjamin Ramos, who is also my friend, one of the coordinators of the Prolibertad Freedom Campaign in New York City. He coordinates Prolibertad's social media website and public relations. He's a longtime community activist, political journalist, and food blogger. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Rafael. Thank you so much. First and foremost, I want to thank you and the folks from the Building Equity Project for inviting me to speak today. Just a quick disclaimer again, Ben Ramos, I'm one of the coordinators of Prolibertad. And for the past 26 years, Prolibertad has been working to educate, organize, and mobilize, not only within the Puerto Rican community, but within allied communities to secure the freedom of the Puerto Rican political prisoners and to demand the immediate decolonization, independence, and self-determination of Puerto Rico. Our organization sees Puerto Rico as a colony of the United States. We are an independentista-focused organization, and that's the lens that we use when we framework our political perspectives on Puerto Rico. Rafael asked me to talk a little bit about what's taking place in Puerto Rico, and that can be kind of difficult because Puerto Rico is a very complex, complicated situation, and there's a lot of things that are taking place on the island on a day-to-day basis. And I, by no means, am the end-all, be-all expert on Puerto Rico and Puerto Rican current affairs, but I wanted to focus this talk on four particular points, four political hot topics that are taking place in the media. I'm going to give little bullet points to each one. And of course, as we do question and answer and we have our own discussion, we'll further get into those topics and bring in other topics as well. First and foremost, I want to talk with, of course, what is the main issue that's taking place in the global media. And that's, of course, the coronavirus and COVID-19. In particular, we're going to talk about how it's been mismanaged in Puerto Rico. If you look at Puerto Rican press, the government has been telling the press that there's only been about 150 to 160 people that have died of the coronavirus in Puerto Rico. They've also stated that only between 5,000 to 6,000 folks have recently been infected with the virus. What's interesting is that that's what the government is telling the media. health officials and the medical community in Puerto Rico all agree that those statistics are completely wrong, inaccurate, and false. The people that are in the hospitals, in the clinics, in the urgent cares, see how many people are going through their doors, and they know that those numbers are completely wrong. This is something that's very common in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is not good about keeping track of numbers. We see that in what happened with Hurricane Maria. 1 minute there was only 1,000 something people that died, and then the following month the information was coming in and definitely the numbers changed. So the statistics around what's happening are all being refuted by the medical community. And part of the reason why they're being refuted is because of the actions of Wanda Vasquez, who's the governor of Puerto Rico. First and foremost, the testing supplies in Puerto Rico to test people for coronavirus and the antibodies are completely ineffectual and inaccurate and inadequate, to be honest. There are people that are going to clinics and taking the exam and being told that they're negative, they're fine, when in actuality, they have the virus. And that's a huge, major public concern. Wanda Vasquez initiated in Puerto Rico a quarantine and then a curfew. The quarantine, of course, makes sense. The curfew is something that has become a civil rights issue. And I say that because a decision was made that at first, either at 6 or 6:30, no one could be outside. Eventually, it got changed to 10 p.m. If you were caught outside of the curfew, you could be arrested and sentenced to 6 months in jail or face a $500 fine. The curfew has been basically implemented and it's been enforced by the Puerto Rican Police Department, which is infamous for its cruelty, its brutality, its corruption, and its harassment. And of course, who are they harassing? Working class people in their neighborhoods. So if you're caught outside after 6 or after 10 p.m., you could be facing a $500 fine. Let's remember the economic situation that Boricuas are facing on the island. Many people are unemployed and most people are underemployed. So going to jail for 6 months or having a $500 fine is something that's really, really an exaggeration of what needs to occur. There have been civil rights and human rights leaders in Puerto Rico that have been protesting and have been denouncing this curfew as completely unnecessary. Now, let's look at the irony of this. There's a curfew and quarantine on the people, yet the governor made the decision that tourists from all over the world can arrive in Puerto Rico, and they don't even have to undergo any testing. They don't even have to have their temperatures checked in the airport. They can just waltz into the island and just basically take advantage of a nice vacation, all the while possibly bringing COVID from their countries of origin to the island. And also, just endangering the population and in turn also being endangered themselves. There's also been a decision in Puerto Rico, excuse me for looking down, but there's also been a decision a mismanagement of the relief aid that was sent to Puerto Rico. All of us have heard in the media for the longest time about that $1,200. Some of us have received it, some of us have not. It was allocated to Puerto Rico, and the vast majority of people have not seen that relief. There are people that have lost businesses, people who can't pay rent, people that are homeless because of the earthquakes and still homeless because of the hurricane that took place in 2017 that have not received that relief aid. People have been asking. There have been protests, civil rights leaders, human rights leaders saying, where is this relief money? Where is the $1,200 that we're supposed to receive? On top of it, you have mega corporations like Walmart and Target and Marshalls that complained to the government and said, we need to open, we're losing revenue. And they were basically given permission in the middle of a quarantine to open up. There's been no regulations around health. I mean, at least here, for a long time, when places were opening up, they were told enforce social distancing, make sure that customers are walking with masks. None of that is happening in Puerto Rico. So there's constant mismanagement when it's come to this global pandemic. And it's because of the decisions of the local government, of the colonial government, that this crisis in Puerto Rico is going to go out of control. Already medical officials are saying if things aren't changed in the island, it's going to be a disaster. And Puerto Rico for the last 7 years has been dealing with disaster after disaster. That's the medical crisis. I want to talk a little bit about the civil code in Puerto Rico. Some changes have occurred in the last couple of months that really threaten Boricua's civil rights. For those of you who need a little bit of a background, 1 second, the civil code is the laws and procedures that govern marriage, adoption, divorce, contracts, property, and a whole slew of other civilian issues. While people were in quarantine, the Puerto Rican governor and her folks that were working with her on this civil code were able to get the Senate and the House of Representatives to basically approve the changes in the code, and they were actually put into effect and signed into law on Monday, June 1st, which was really disrespectful and ironic because June 1st is the beginning of Pride Month, and the changes in the code specifically have made queer and LGBT and trans lives in Puerto Rico extremely difficult. First and foremost, trans folks now, when they want to change the gender, their gender on their birth certificate and change their pronouns on the birth certificate, they now have to undergo a court procedure that they never had to undergo before. Trans people in Puerto Rico face incredible discrimination and transphobia when it comes to the justice system. Now the justice system has been stacked against them even further. Also, the changes in the civil code have actually made it so that local judges in the municipalities in Puerto Rico have the power to interpret the code in whatever way they want. So essentially, a justice system that is transphobic and discriminatory and full of conservative judges now have more power to say, no, you don't have the right to change your gender. Whatever your gender is on the birth certificate is what it's going to be. So essentially curtailing trans people's right to identify themselves the way they want to be identified. There's also the situation that's taken place that affects queer couples in terms of how they want to adopt and surrogacy. A lot of the changes in the code have actually become very ambiguous and have given judges, again, a lot of carte blanche to interpret the law the way they want. And surrogacy and adoption laws are really specific. They're specific to everyone, but in particular, LGBT, queer, trans people really rely on these laws in order for them to build families and to adopt and to have surrogacy. And those laws have been changing. Those laws are becoming far more biased against them. There's also some changes in the code that are threatening women's legal right to abortion and reproductive rights. The laws aren't very specific, but when laws are made to be ambiguous, that gives a lot of power to courts and to judges. There's also a situation where civil rights leaders and human rights leaders have been denouncing the changes in the code because of the process that was undergone. Again, I said that they changed between April and June. During April and June, there was a curfew, there was quarantining. So when it came time for the public hearings, most people could not attend. They were under quarantine and curfew. So basically, civil law was changed without the populace having any type of feedback and input. This has sparked massive protests throughout the island. Again, civil rights, human rights leaders have been denouncing this. How can you change a code that affects everyone and not get any proper public input, public feedback? So this, again, has sparked such a negative response, and it's an ongoing thing. Even though the law has been signed into effect as of June 1st, there's still a lot of people challenging this and trying to have the code be edited. I want to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement in Puerto Rico. The murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and various other African-American citizens in the United States have really had an impact globally. In particular, in Puerto Rico, we see Afro-Boricua communities and neighborhoods really standing up and pushing the issue of racism and colorism to the center stage. Now, to be very clear, Afro-Boricuas have been talking about racism and colorism for centuries. This is not a new topic, but what's happened in the world dynamic is that this has been put into center stage, and it's allowed a platform for them to really say that Puerto Rico is a society that really has a discriminatory policy against Afro-Boricuas. In particular, there's large issues of inequality and inequity that have to be looked at within Afro-Latino, Afro-Boricua communities and neighborhoods. It's also inspired police reform. Again, like I said before, the Puerto Rican Police Department on the island is infamous for cruelty, corruption, brutality, and harassment. And who have been the subject of all four of those forms of discrimination has been the Afro-Boricua men and women that live on the island. So everything that's happened with the Black Lives Matter movement has really allowed this community to push this center stage and to really start holding certain folks accountable. I'm not saying that it's a perfect situation, because it's not, but right now there have been Puerto Rican celebrities and politicians that have made racist statements, very anti-Black statements, and they're losing their jobs. They are having, they're getting more than just a slap on the wrist. So this is a movement to the left that's not exactly what it needs to be, but it's a lot better than what it has been. I want to end this conversation on the whole issue of the plebiscite. That's something that's really being discussed a lot. There's a plebiscite that's taking place, I believe, on Tuesday, November 3rd in Puerto Rico. For those of you who need a little background, the plebiscite is essentially a popular vote, a popular survey. Usually the plebiscites are organized and the populace has to choose between the status issues of Puerto Rico, independence, statehood, or the ELA, which is the colonial model, the current status quo. This plebiscite is being pushed primarily by El Partido Nuevo Progresista, the PNP, which is the statehood party. And they've actually pushed a legislation in which this survey, this plebiscite only gives you one option. Should Puerto Rico be a state or not? It's important to recognize that these plebiscites are non-binding. And what that means is that the US Congress and the president do not have to do anything with this decision. This essentially is just a public survey, a survey that is a waste of time, energy, and money. And I say that because the last plebiscite took place in 2017, and the statehood party is always boasting for the past 3 years that 97% of the people that voted for statehood. What they neglect to tell you is the math, the true math, which is that only 23% of the population actually voted. 77% of the population boycotted, ignored it, or just didn't care, because these plebiscites are non-binding. They mean absolutely nothing. A lot of political analysts are saying that the reason why the statehood party is really pushing this is because they need new branding. They need to look good for their constituents, but also to the world, because in the past 6 or 7 years, all the corruption scandals that have taken place on the island have been under the auspices of the statehood parties. The people that have been arrested for corruption, the people who have been ousted from office, like the last governor, that last summer, hundreds of thousands of people protested so that governor could be removed for his racist and misogynist statements, were all under the statehood party. So this plebiscite, this whole, we need to secure the future of the island, is very much a branding technique. It's a way of saying, hey, our party is not that bad, even though, again, 7 years worth of corruption. And that's just the recent years. We've got to look at the history of the Puerto Rican statehood party to see really the corruption that they've supported. So those are the 4 issues I just wanted to bring up. Those are the big topics in the Puerto Rican zeitgeist. Again, there's a lot that takes place on the island. It's a very a hotbed of political issues, and we'll get into that, as we converse and we answer questions. So I want to just say thank you for this opportunity to talk from our perspective, and I want to send it back to Rafael.
Sure. Ben, at this part of the segment, we wanted to kind of give a little bit of a dialogue. You mentioned any of the panelists can ask question here, or we can have a little bit of a talk. You mentioned that the People's Movement have kicked out the corrupt governor, Rosselló. I'm curious as to what's happening now with the junta. Can you talk a little bit about that, in terms of what's going on with what they call La Junta?
Okay. So folks, Rafael is referring to the Fiscal Control Board that was established about 4 to 5 years ago in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico's economy has been in crisis, I would say, for the past 121 years. And I'm not being facetious when I say that. It really has been an economic crisis for more than a century. And many years ago, in order to deal with the Puerto Rican debt, and the fact that there was an economic lull on the island started borrowing money from hedge funds. And of course, when you borrow money from a hedge fund, eventually they want their money back. And a few years ago, it was established that Puerto Rico was $72 billion in debt. Those hedge funds wanted their money. President Obama signed in what was called the Puerto Rico promesa. It was the I forgot exactly promesa. It's like stability. The promesa is an acronym for like it's like a stability act that was put into place, and that stability act created a fiscal control board. The fiscal control board is made up of the hedge funds, primarily of the hedge fund leaders that created the debt on the island. So the debtors are now controlling the economy and have more power over the Puerto Rican political scene and economy than the governor itself. The governor by no means is any great shakes, but at least the governor was voted in by the people. This is a control board that has more power than the governor and was elected by Obama. It's a situation in which this junta has decided that austerity measures are the way to pay back this $72 billion debt. Austerity measures always attack working people. That's why in the past 6 to 7 years in Puerto Rico, hospitals are closing. Right now with the COVID coronavirus crisis, the lack of hospitals has really been felt. They've been closing down schools. They've been attacking the pensions and retirement funds of government workers. So in order for this debt to be taken care of, they're robbing the people of their resources. Imagine being a teacher in Puerto Rico and working 30, 40 years and building up a pension and a retirement plan that will keep you going amidst all this economic crisis, and then being told that it's been cut in half. It's going to go to this debt, a debt that the Puerto Rican people did not inquire. You know who inquired it? The colonial government and their corruption and their mismanagement of the local Puerto Rican government. So what's happening right now with the junta? The junta is moving forward with their austerity measures. As always, whenever there is a crisis in Puerto Rico, we saw this with Hurricane Maria, we've seen it with the earthquakes. These crises are the excellent opportunities to create, to implement these austerity measures and call them relief aid. So that's what's taking place. Puerto Rican people are still paying outrageous amounts of taxes. Puerto Rican people are still having their wages cut. In the last couple of days, there have been retired teachers protesting because they've seen their retirement funds and their pensions cut in half, sometimes even cut by 3/4. Imagine your pension being cut by 3/4 just so that it can pay a debt to some hedge funder. It's been a really horrific situation when it comes to this junta. And the Puerto Rican working class people are the ones that are really feeling this. The teachers that have been displaced, the schools that have been closed, the children that are now sitting in classrooms 40, 45 kids deep. I mean, we are feeling these measures. And again, you have an earthquake, you have hurricanes. Relief money is going to deal with the debt and not going to people. To this day, there are people nearly 3 years later in Puerto Rico, because of Hurricane Maria, have not seen a FEMA check at all, have not received any federal aid. Why? Because it's more important to deal with this financial debt than it is to take care of the people. This is, in international law, this is called an odious debt, a debt that was not inquired by the people, and the people should not be paying it. But in Puerto Rico, the colony, that is exactly what's taking place.
I want to pose the next question to either Angel or Nancy. What do you guys? I mean, I chose you guys because you're activist artists. So I wanted, maybe we could speak about what do you think the role of the artist is, during these times. So you could speak to a little bit about why you chosen the art activism. Either of you can take the question. Nancy, you want to start?
I believe that I believe that the role of the poet, in my opinion anyway, is to one of the roles is to document what's happening um, in society, and of course I am an activist, so I document what I see that is the wrongs of society, or the injustices that occur, because I believe that it's important to bring those to light, especially when the none of the very few media outlets or any other forms of outlet will do that, so I think it's important to keep it, to document it, and to have it for posterity. um, that's what I think.
Great. Angel?
Well, you look throughout the history of Puerto Rican struggle, the artists were always there, right in the midst of it, to definitely tell the stories in a way people can understand. And I think that's really key right now. Say it in ways that people can finally see what's going on. I mean, we could hear what's going on in the news, and maybe we don't necessarily understand what's being heard, but through a song or a poem or a visual art, that message could come across in ways that might not be possible otherwise. I think without it, we have a really hard time getting a message across. With it, we could build mass movements with it. That's why all freedom movements have their own cultural sections, because without them, you just can't get the word out the way you need to.
Angel, you're also part of the POP, right? People's
Yes.
Organization of Progress.
Hmm.
How do you see the Puerto Rican community uh, interacting with the Black Lives Matter movement, for example? I mean, in the greater diaspora, do you see the Puerto Ricans getting involved with this movement?
Well, I think you're seeing a lot of younger people that are really tuning into it. And I think that's really the key. We need to reach definitely the younger generation right now. And we also have to look at past examples of Black Puerto Rican unity. I mean, this is not new, but this is something we need to talk about. I mean, whether it's and I'm glad you mentioned pop, because what helped them make pop possible was the events that after the uprising of 1967, what happened? Blacks and Puerto Ricans realized they had to come together to change the political power within Newark, New Jersey, and having a Black and Puerto Rican convention that made that possible. So we need to look at the fact that we've been here before, and I think this is an opportunity that we could bring that together again, and not just address the Black Puerto Rican unity, but also address the specific needs that Afro Boricuas have been calling out about for hundreds of years, and they still need to be heard, and realize that without the African presence in Puerto Rico, both of North and Central and West Africa, it's not going to go as far as it needs to. So we need to acknowledge not just the fact that we're united with Blacks and Puerto Ricans. We need to see the Africanness in ourselves, and also see how it expresses itself. And again, like I said, and even Jesus Colon, who actually wrote a very beautiful essay. I had a chance to read about Black and Puerto Rican unity, and he wrote that about 50, 60 years ago. So we got a lot of examples we can look at. And to be frank with you, and I'll just say it outright, that class could be a good way to bring all of this together. So it's not just an issue of race, although we need to bring, but definitely class needs to be talked about.
Nancy, I know that your poetry is also influenced by your passion around the environment. Can you make the link about what's happening now with COVID and the larger environmental, what's happening?
I believe that the coronavirus is a result of the environmental degradation that's going on different levels, and I think that's really, honestly, that's next to the coronavirus. That's the biggest concern that we should all have, because I would say, not to be pessimistic, but I would say that we have a good maybe 10 years or so left in terms of being able to have an environment that we could actually function in before things start really falling apart. The situation is dire, it's incredibly dire. I mean, I think the Arctic reached, I think, 100 degrees not too long ago. That's gone. It's over. You know, when you see something like that, if I'm not mistaken, I think it did Siberia or something of that nature that I saw in an article. So the situation is incredibly dire and it's immediate, and we're not going to be able to stop it, but we can try to slow it down. But it's a massive, it's immense. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to really counteract it, to be very honest with you. But until then, I keep going, keep writing, keep documenting, keep doing the work, no, don't stop, that's the only way that I could deal with it. So
Ben, I wanted to ask you, how do you see, I mean, with the colonial status of Puerto Rico, we see the results of basically colonialism. The COVID is part of that, this $70 billion debt. I mean, how do you see do you see how do you see the anti-colonial movement happening in Puerto Rico? Do you see us getting free?
I see us growing. I think liberation is an evolution. And I think the more that corruption in Puerto Rico is brought to light, the more that there's mismanagement, the more that people become aware of what is really happening around them and start, making those links to how all of the crises come from colonialism, we'll see a mass movement. Are we the mass movement that we're supposed to be? Unfortunately, no, we're not. This is going to be liberation is going to be a gradual process, but I do have faith that our people will see that there is a need for a change, and not just a reformist change in Puerto Rico with a couple of laws here and there, but really a change in the colonial status. Again, with everything that happens, when you have a president that goes to the island and decides the best way I can help this island is by throwing bounty rolls at people and not even and talking about how the country and other countries like it are shitholes, you start seeing the racism, the imperialism, and the second-class citizenship, and that changes people. That moves people that are pro-statehood sometimes into the center, and people that were pro-ELA towards the left and voting independentista. So I feel independence is inevitable. When that is it in my lifetime? Is it in your daughter's lifetime? I don't know. I can't predict that, but we are a long chain. Our chain started back when the Taínos were fighting invasion, and it continues forward. We are part of that chain, and we're going to it'll continue into the future. Of course, everyone wants everything immediate. We come from that capitalist consumerist, I want it now, I want it now. I don't think we're ready for it now. The people are not supporting it now, but change happens. Evolution is gradual, and I see ourselves moving forward. And the more we unmask and the more we demystify the corruption, the colonial relationship, the more people will grow and learn. I'm an optimist. I've got other independentista brothers and sisters and family that are very pessimistic, and they take that perspective. I truly believe that the power of the people can't stop. It won't stop. And we will see independence. Again, maybe not in my lifetime, maybe your daughter may see it, maybe it's your great-grandkids, Rafael. But independence will one day happen. We have the right to be free. We have the power to be free. We will be free.
Ben, I know that Prolibertad has also worked on the movement to free the political prisoners. Can you give an update on what's happening with some of the Puerto Rican political prisoners?
I am happy to say that we are in a very unique situation, a position that we have not been in since the late 1970s. Right now, there are no Puerto Rican political prisoners in jail. We have a sister named Ana Belén Montes. She identifies as a prisoner of conscience. She's in jail because she chose to follow her conscience and not the law when it came to supporting Cuba. Her case is very complicated. You can go to prolibertad.org and read about her case, but what is significant is that we don't have any folks that identify as political prisoners behind the walls. And Ana Belén is actually going to be released in about a year and a half, and she'll be transitioning from the military jail hospital that she's in Texas, and will be moving to Puerto Rico in with her family. Nina Dros Franco, a sister who was identified as a Puerto Rican political prisoner, who was in jail for 3 years, was released in February. She's currently in Puerto Rico under parole for the next couple of years and dealing with some financial issues due to the fines that she has to pay. But right now we have only one sister in prison, and she's got a release date. It'll be early 2022. So we're in a very unique situation, but we stay ever vigilant, because there's protests happening in Puerto Rico all the time. There's arrests taking place in Puerto Rico all the time. And we have no idea when the next generation of political prisoners may go to jail. And hopefully we as Prolibertad will be there to address it, to raise consciousness and to build those political links. That's another way that we will see that independence will reach us, when we realize that those of us that fight for independence are targets for repression and targets for incarceration. That's another thing that lifts and raises consciousness. And I want to go back to the question that you asked about artists. The overwhelming majority of our political prisoners have been poets, have been writers, have been dancers, have been journalists, have been everything and anything under the sun, because artists are the ones that are true warriors. Artists are the ones that bring that message to the people in a way that the people love. It's not boring old Ben talking all day. It's the poetry, it's the dancing, it's the music that raises consciousness. And when we look at our political prisoner history, we have to acknowledge that most of them have been artists. And that's because artists are fierce and artists are dangerous. Artists create revolution.
We are now, have been streaming through YouTube, and we have a couple questions that people are asking, basically, on how people can get involved, or what can folks in New York do. Anybody want to speak to that? I mean, there's so many things that are happening in New York, I mean, in regards to all, I would encourage everybody to join their local chapter of Black Lives Matter. I would say look up Prolibertad on the web. Welcome, to participate. I feel like so many things can be done, from writing to organizing teach-ins around, the question of the Puerto Rican diaspora. How are we being affected, and how we can help to free ourselves. I'm an educator, so I believe in the power of education to change, to help people change and better their condition. Does anyone else want to talk about things that people before we get to the encore of poetry? We'll get to that, but folks want to know how they can get involved.
I'll start it off.
Sure.
Rafi, thank you for the plug. We have you can find Prolibertad on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can look us up on our website, prolibertad.org. Like I said, we educate, organize, and mobilize. We're in neighborhoods and communities. We do our marches, we do our street meetings. We go out there and we raise consciousness, and we need volunteers. We need people to march with us. We need people to help us give out information. We need people to organize events like this one, maybe for your church, for your high school, for your university. Let's have these talks around Puerto Rico, and let's get active on it. Like Rafi said, education is paramount. It's the foundation to liberation. We need people to raise consciousness, and we need to build solidarity. It's not just about being a Puerto Rican that learns about Puerto Rico. It's about being a Puerto Rican that understands the colonialism in Palestine, that understands the blockade that exists in Cuba, understands the neo-colonialism that the United States has perpetrated in the Philippines and Guam. So it's about making sure that you're broadening out those perspectives. And we do that by study, by discussion and talk. So look us up on Prolibertad. Even I'll do a plug. This Sunday at 3 o'clock, Call to Action on Puerto Rico, a sister organization to Prolibertad. We're having a day in solidarity with Puerto Rican independence. We have activists from around the diaspora and from the island itself. 3 p.m. on Facebook. Look for the Call to Action Facebook group. You'll be able to watch it and ask questions and start that educational process. Over to you, Rafi.
Nancy, I wanted to ask you, a lot of times in the poetry world, it's really kind of like self-indulgent. Can you speak a little bit about, you spoke about already the true, role of a poet, but maybe you could talk about, the literature, the work that you do, and how you see the role of literature and art, again, uh, in this time.
Well, like I said, I do believe that one of the aspects of writing poetry is to document
Right.
the situations that are occurring, especially situations of unjust situations, injustice. But like Ben had mentioned, that it's true. The artists are the ones that are usually in the forefront, and a lot of times, as you see, especially or I would say in particular, in South America, at least what I know it's been all over, but I've paid particular attention to South and Central America, where um, the poets or the writers are the first ones that the dictatorships kill, because we're the ones that supposedly say the truth. Now, what happens here in the United States, as far as I'm concerned, is that poetry has been capitalized too, like everything else, and now it's about who's the star, and who um, who could sell the more books, and it's to me, that's not what poetry at least is about. Maybe other facets in the art world could be about that a little bit more than poetry. To me, poetry is serious business, and I was taught that by Pedro Pietri, and Piri Thomas, who was famous in his own right, but who was always about the people and the struggle, and he always worked in those um, for those causes, and so did Pedro Pietri. So um, that's what I believe. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I want to take a question from the audience. This is from Roberto Borrero. He's asking about, we spoke about the link between uh, the African identity within Puerto Ricans. How do we see, Angel? Maybe you could talk a little bit about how we see the Puerto Rican and indigenous unity.
Well, definitely, that's something we need to consider. Ben alluded to that a little while ago and talk about that indigenous Taino spirit that continues on, and we need to keep that in mind, especially because when you think about when you look at Puerto Rican Spanish, it's like Caribbean Spanish. It's so that by itself sets us apart, and it's not just that; it's just the fact that one of the great scientific experiments of all time happened when Casi Aguebana proved to us that a white man is not God. And that's something that we always need to consider, those great contributions that the Tainos continued to live in very humble lives. And their lives were just totally destroyed through genocide by the invading Spaniards. But they couldn't kill the spirit, they couldn't kill the blood, they couldn't kill what it means to be. I mean, just the fact that, remember when during the Grito de Lara of 1868, what was declared the Republic of Borinquen? Borinquen, the original name of the island. That's the islands that stay with us this day. So there's a lot within us that we see in just how we express ourselves. I mean, we say Boricua. It's not an accident. We call ourselves Boricua. And one powerful thing when I see uh, we as Puerto Ricans united with our indigenous sisters and brothers from around the world, that's when I think we can see some real change. And we realize that we're part of a global indigenous experience. Whether it's the Garifuno that migrated to the United States from Central America and the Caribbean. You see other indigenous nationalities like the Quechua peoples of Ecuador. The now peoples of the Lumad and more of the southern Philippines. The Chamorro people of Guam that are under U.S. colonial domination, just like Puerto Rico is. But we just don't hear about it, and we need to connect with each other. So I think part of getting in touch with our indigenous identity is being aware that we're part of a global movement, and that could really help us get the word out, not just about what's going on Puerto Rico and the island and on the islands and Puerto Ricans out in the diaspora, but also realize we're linked to that worldwide indigenous movement.
Thank you, Angel. You know, I also thought about our nationalist leader, Rafael Cancel Miranda, who was also imprisoned with Leonard Peltier, right? Ben, you could speak to that a little bit more. Yeah, but I also wanted to ask you, Ben, if you can, this is coming from Roberto again, if you could speak a little bit more to what's going on in terms of the environment in Puerto Rico, like the destruction that's happening, the ash that is being, dumped on the people. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Thank you. I love to relate this story because for us in the diaspora, our ability to relate with our indigenous brothers and sisters and indigenous family is a little bit easier and a little bit more organic than it is on the island, from at least my perspective. And I love to talk about how when Don Rafael Cancel Miranda, a famous revolutionary nationalist, was in jail, a young brother that came in from AIM named Leonard Peltier, both of them met in prison, and Don Rafa took him under his wing and taught him what it was like to be in prison, to be a political prisoner in prison. And when Don Rafa leaves, he gets out in 1979. 2 years later, Luis Rosa, a Puerto Rican revolutionary who was a member of the FALN, goes to jail, and he meets Leonard Peltier, and Leonard Peltier became his mentor. So I love telling the story about how we as Boricuas have had this in close political link with our indigenous brothers and sisters of this part of the world, of this section of Turtle Island. So there's that link exists, and it's something that we have perpetuated. You know, AIM has worked closely with the Puerto Rican independence movement and vice versa. We have always created, colonized people have this way of getting together and building solidarity. And we've been able to do that in the diaspora for decades. It isn't anything that's new. It didn't start in Dakota with the pipeline. This is something, there's a tradition of this that goes back decades, and it's a powerful thing, and it brings them closer to us and us closer to them and us closer to our Afro-Indigenous culture. To talk a little bit about the ashes, I think Roberto specifically is mentioning what's happening in Peñuelas, which is a community. In Puerto Rico, there's a massive industrialization that takes place, and industrialization creates toxic waste. One of the most common forms of toxic waste in Puerto Rico are these ashes that are toxic, carcinogenic, radioactive, and dangerous. And the Puerto Rican government has thought that it's a good idea to dump this toxic waste in places like Peñuelas, in working class communities. Because of course, what does a working class community need? We need toxic waste around us. It's insane. It's like what's happened in Vieques when they sandwiched the population in between of the island and had military bombings, radioactive bombings happening on both sides of them. Right now, the communities have fought against that. They've been able to stop the dumping of those ashes, but unfortunately, I will say I haven't kept up on that recently, but I know that people, environmentalists in Puerto Rico, have been fighting this constant need for the government to dump, toxic materials and toxic waste in working class communities. You don't see that in the upper echelon in San Juan and in the metropolitan area. There's no toxic waste and there's no dumping in those areas, but they love to go to working class communities and do that. The people of Peñuelas and Vieques and Culebra have been fighting these environmental movements and fighting these fights for a long time. And a lot of people love to say that environmentalism isn't really political, it's a human rights issue. It is very much a political issue, because who's creating that toxic waste? A colonial government. Who's creating that toxic waste? American companies. Who do they not care about? The Puerto Rican people. Are they taking their toxic waste to the United States? Absolutely not. They're dumping it in Puerto Rican communities. And that makes it very much an environmental issue and a colonial political status issue. So what's happening in Peñuelas now is an ongoing struggle. What's happening in Vieques? Ongoing struggle. Vieques hasn't been cleaned up yet. The toxic areas have not been cleaned up. Culebra is still dealing with environmental issues since the Navy left Culebra decades ago. It's always an ongoing fight, and our environmentalists in Puerto Rico have their plates full. And the environmentalists that are independentistas are always the ones that are really linking it back. Environmentalism is deeply political and it's deeply imperialist.
Thank you, Ben. I wanted to talk a little bit about the impact of colonialism on Puerto Rico and as it relates to our identity. As you guys are aware, so if how we are understood in the United States, after 1492 with the Spanish conquest of Puerto Rico, many Puerto Ricans are quick to identify maybe a line because of racism with their Spanish identity. We're Spanish, rather than really recognize that we are also Afro-Indigenous. And that's because of racism. That's because of the faulty education system. That we're quick to acknowledge the colonizer within our identity. We're Spanish, rather than recognize the long history of us as indigenous, Taino, Arawaks, and Afro descendancy. And that's we can talk about, let's say, for example, why this is. For example, the schools in Pennsylvania, Carlisle School, where Native Americans, Puerto Ricans were also at the Carlisle School, where their identity were stripped from them. They were forced to, they were beaten for speaking their own languages. This is the northern natives as well as Puerto Ricans. You had to speak English, for example, in this school, or else you were beaten. And this is just one example of how our identities, the European identity was kind of forced upon us. Right? Not to say that we don't have that, we do, but because of racism, we do not recognize the fact that we are also indigenous. Right? And so, before we get to the culmination of the program, is there anything else that we want to speak? Any other points that we want to flesh out here? Is for any of the panelists.
Well, I think that it is really important to understand that our background is not only Spaniard, but is very much African, is very much indigenous, also. And I I don't know. I see younger, especially here, maybe also on the island, although I don't live there all the time. I go back and forth. I see younger folks sort of realizing that now, and which is good. It's a good thing that we are a people of color. We're black people. We're not. We may be different shades, but we are indigenous. That's who we are. And that has to be dealt with, accepted, dealt with, and we have to be proud of that, because there's a myriad of accomplishments that have occurred with our people, and it's just been obscured by the educational system, which is basically a form of indoctrination, and now the educational system is purposely being dismantled and degraded, and they don't want an educated populace. That's the last thing they want. So what are they doing? They put the Vols, or whatever her name is, in charge, and it's just, I mean, Trump is like the culmination, the nightmare, the culmination of all of these years of the United States being, in charge and doing things recklessly, and not caring about, not being humanitarian, because somebody has or should be in charge, I guess, or whatever. But you have to be humanitarian. You can't. The United States started off, and I'm saying United States as opposed to America. The United States started off on a bad foot. You know what I'm saying? On bad footing, and been there ever since. And it's right now we're the country is almost but decimated. I mean, the employment rate, we have a pandemic. The head of the country is really a despot and an authoritarian, a racist. I mean, we're at the one of the lowest points ever. And that's a culmination of everything that has come before. Basically, I think. Anyway, but okay, I'm long-winded. Sorry about that.
That's all right. Angel,
Yeah.
I wanted to give this question to you. This is a question around, do you see the links between, let's say, the northern natives, what's happening, for example, in the pipelines in the U.S. and the destruction of the sacred sites within Puerto Rico itself? This is a question that brought up by Roberto as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there are Taino relics that are inside the Museum of the Vatican that were stolen from our lands. So this theft has been going on for too long, and any attempt to destroy more sacred lands. I mean, look, we saw in Standing Rock, not just sacred lands, but source of water. I mean, people just want to clean water, and people in Puerto Rico, we just want clean air. Puerto Ricans living in Asthma Alley in the Bronx, I mean, want clean air too, and they want clean water. So we all have to be linked this way, and we have to constantly see that we share in this not just the fact of indigenous identity. I mean that's a big step too, but we also have to see we're suffering the same environmental destruction and the theft of our patrimony. I mean, what belongs rightfully to the indigenous peoples of the earth that have been the stewards of all corners of the earth, and even something as simple as just stealing our knowledge, stealing our music, stealing our culture. They hate us, but they want what we have. They want to take away our treasures. Remember, they hate us, but they want to exploit us. And we cannot forget that. That is not a contradiction. That's the way it always has. And as long as this wicked system exists, that's the way it's going to be unless we fight to change it and be willing to go all the way to fight to preserve our present heritage and the memories of our ancestors and the knowledge of our ancestors.
Thank you, Angel. Remember, we are streaming live on YouTube. You can have a question or comment. We're going to be moving towards the poetry culmination now of our program. But if you have a burning question, you can put it up on the YouTube site. We're going to start with Nancy, and then I'll go and Angel will finish. We'll have some last talks, questions, and then that will be it for the night. So take it away, Nancy.
Okay. Well, this is one of my more recent pieces. It's called "Plagued America," and it does deal with the pandemic and other things connected to that. It takes a plague to crystallize the malignancy occupying the White House that churns out death, a gross carnage of humanity stockpiled inside U-Haul trucks. It takes a plague to breach the lies we live in this America, bearing its mercenary truths, its decomposing laws, scavenged by elected vultures. A plague is what it takes to realize red baseball capped buffoons can freely amass assault rifles, the privileged, scant, illiterate, and starved lined up for miles to reach food banks, gleefully waving soiled Confederate flags in tatters. A plague must be what it takes to discover our illusory lives, the hamster wheel we've been sold, traveling on it all along, toward manufactured dreams, toward nowhere in reality. It takes a plague to recognize we are orphans in this America, sparing no expense. We're marked for ruin by the slothful elites who bask in swimming pools of our blood. A plague is what it takes to wake up from this American dream, to see our children encaged, our mothers, our fathers butchered in broad daylight, our homes mired in soot water, our lands laced of oil pipelines discharging at whim, scourging valleys filled of life, decimating our future under a foul, dark layer of evil. A plague must be what it takes for our redress in the streets of this America, our decisive rebellion, our final renaissance. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
This
I'm
poem
honored
next.
to be here.
This next poem I'm going to read is called "Burn." Black justified rage pours into streets of indifference, ignored by centuries of hatred and neglect of the poor. A knee on their neck, a noose on their neck, a boot on our neck for centuries. What does that do to a people? Resilient blackness, vast as the universe upon which we are all shown. Why are the poor so vilified? Failures of humanity's self-reflection, too hard to witness? Never mind the stolen wealth that has decimated communities for 500 years. It's no coincidence how ailments of the colonized are so similar. Burn. Burn every fucking bank and Target store. The looting won't ever compare to the theft of a culture. So I say burn. Burn for every black body. Burn for the poor. Burn for the true natives whose lands you have stolen and rituals destroyed. Burn for the islands you have taken as prizes of war. Burn for the lynchings. Burn for your war on the poor. With your capitalist faces, save me your pity. Your hands are bloody. Burn for Tulsa, for Charlotte, for LA, for every pig you let loose on our people. Burn for your lives, for the children left in cages, on stolen borders, and those in our minds. Burn for the churches who got rich at the same time. Burn for your crosses laid bare at our feet. Burn for your terrorists, white hoods and white sheets. I say burn. This is for every urban ghetto, for projects and prisons, both physical and those in our minds. Burn for every black mother left without a son. Burn. We will come upon you like IT in 1804. Beware, the time is up. We will raise up against all systems of oppression and take that knee off our collective neck. Burn, baby, burn. All right, Angel. You're up.
All right. Okay, let's bring this home. And I was thinking about the Theodore Roosevelt statue at the American Museum of National History when I wrote this one. Rough Riders' boots remain on the neck of Borican. We cannot talk about taking down monuments to empire without empires crumbling. Statues are objects, while empires treat lives as objects, to be bought and sold to the highest capitalists. The Rough Rider may be on horseback, yet his boot remains on the neck of occupied Borican. To enrich an empire, did you really think Puerto Rico has nothing to plunder? Why did an elder die alone? Was it because of Hurricane Maria? An earthquake? Or was it some other crime against humanity? There are only good criminals and bad criminals stealing in this wicked system.
Thank you, Angel. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the panelists, Ben, Angel, and Nancy. Thank you for taking of your time. We really appreciated it. The work was wonderful tonight.
Thank you. It was wonderful presentation too, Ben. There's a lot that I learned also. I really appreciate the information, and your work, Angel, was superb. Thank you for everything, guys.
Gracias, gracias, gracias a todo. The poetry was extraordinary, guys. Thank you for uplifting our spirits like that.
Hey,
I'd also like to
thank you
thank
for
Ben Uniac for the technical who put in this flawless. We're able to organize this pretty flawlessly. Thank you for your work and the work of the JCAL, Roberto Borrero, and the Building Equities Project. Thank you again. Hopefully that we will be able to, do an update to this and get all these poets back and do another program in the near future. So again, I want to say thank you for all of the panelists. Your work is truly inspiring, and keep it up. I'm feeling freedom right now.
I wanted to just also thank everybody who's been listening and who have contributed with comments and questions. And Borrero had some really interesting comments I was looking at and some questions. I appreciate that. And I also appreciate Grisel Acosta, who's a great poet, a good friend of mine, who also came by to see us. So thank you everyone for being there. Janice, who I'm just seeing her comments, it's wonderful to have them all here. And you Belkis, thank you.
All right, if that's it, that's a wrap, y'all. Thank you very much, and we'll say good night now.
Gracias, gracias a todos.
Thank you.
Take care, mi gente.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.